The radar screen flickered twice before going dark. In the command bunker beneath Ramstein Air Base, Colonel Marcus Thorne stared at the empty display where Flight 447 had vanished exactly 17 minutes ago. The silence stretched like a held breath until Lieutenant Davies broke it with a whisper that carried the weight of dread. "Sir, that's the same pattern. 3 weeks earlier, Operation Nightfall had been scrubbed after intelligence suggested a leak. The mission profile was classified beyond most clearance levels, but the flight path was identical to what they'd just witnessed. Flight 447 had been a routine training exercise, two F-16s conducting mock intercepts over the North Sea. Now both aircraft were gone, their last known position matching coordinates that should have been buried in classified files. Captain Vera Nightingale, Kozlov's voice crackled through the radio one final time. "Control, this is Nightingale. We have visual on unidentified aircraft, moving to intercept." Then nothing but static. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Kozlov had been excluded from Operation Nightfall despite being the squadron's most skilled pilot. The official reason was operational requirements. But everyone knew the truth. She'd been vocal about inconsistencies in the mission briefing, asking questions that made certain people uncomfortable. Colonel Thorne rubbed his temples, feeling the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders like lead. 23 years of service, and he'd never lost a pilot under circumstances this strange. The North Sea was empty except for a few fishing vessels, yet something had made two experienced aviators disappear without a trace. "Pull the satellite feeds," he ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos building in his chest. "I want every frame analyzed, and get me the tower recordings from the last hour." As the staff scrambled to comply, Thorne couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something crucial. Kozlov wasn't just any pilot. She was methodical, precise, and utterly fearless. If she'd identified unknown aircraft, there was a reason. The woman who'd earned her call sign by singing Mozart during a harrowing night landing in Afghanistan wouldn't vanish without leaving breadcrumbs. The bunker's fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting harsh shadows across maps and monitor screens. Outside, the October sky was turning the color of old blood, and somewhere in that vast expanse, answers waited. But first, they had to find what remained of Flight 447. The pattern was there, hidden in plain sight. It would take them 3 days to see it, and by then, everything would have changed. The first anomaly appeared on Lieutenant Davies' screen at 3:47 hours. A single radar contact, moving at impossible speed through the coordinates where Flight 447 had vanished. The signature lasted exactly 12 seconds before disappearing, leaving behind a digital ghost that would haunt the night shift for hours to come. Davies had been monitoring the search grid when the contact materialized, tracking southeast at Mach 2.3 through airspace that should have been empty. No flight plan, no transponder code, no communication with air traffic control. Just a streak of light on the radar that defied conventional aircraft capabilities. "Colonel, you need to see this," Davies called across the bunker, his voice tight with barely controlled excitement. Thorne approached the workstation where Davies was rewinding the radar tape. The timestamp showed 0347:23 when the contact appeared, a bright blip moving with purpose through the search zone. For 12 seconds, it held course and speed, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. "Run it again," Thorne commanded, leaning closer to the screen. The sequence repeated: contact, movement, disappearance. No gradual fade suggesting an aircraft climbing or descending out of radar range. The signature simply ceased to exist, as if something had switched off reality itself. "Sir, this is moving faster than anything in our inventory," Davies whispered. "The trajectory takes it through the exact coordinates where Nightingale transmitted her last message." Thorne studied the data, his mind racing through possibilities. Experimental aircraft, foreign technology, equipment malfunction. None of it fit the pattern. The contact had appeared precisely where two F-16s had vanished, moving with supernatural speed through hostile airspace. Who else has seen this? Just me, sir. I was running the overnight monitoring shift when it appeared. Keep it that way. Flag this recording with the highest classification and transfer it to my personal files. Not a word to anyone until I give clearance. Davies nodded, his fingers dancing across the keyboard to implement the security protocols. As the classification stamps appeared on the file, Thorne felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bunker's air conditioning. In his gut, he knew they were dealing with something beyond standard operating procedures. The radar screen flickered again, and for a moment, Thorne thought he saw another contact forming. But when Davies adjusted the gain, the display showed only empty sky and the faint returns from distant commercial aircraft following their assigned flight paths. "Sir, what do you think happened to Captain Kozlov?" Thorne stared at the screen, watching the cursor sweep through coordinates that had become a graveyard for questions without answers. Somewhere in that darkness, Nightingale was either dead or facing something that military training couldn't prepare her for. "I think she found what she was looking for," he said finally. "The question is whether she'll live to tell us about it." The secure phone rang at 400 hours sharp, its electronic trill cutting through the bunker's perpetual hum. Colonel Thorne answered on the second ring, knowing that calls at this hour rarely brought good news. "Thorne here. Colonel, this is General Harrison. I need you to shut down the search for Flight 447 immediately." The words hit like a physical blow. Thorne gripped the phone tighter, his knuckles white against the black plastic. "Sir, we have two missing pilots and evidence of—" "You have orders, Colonel. Effective immediately, Flight 447 is reclassified as a training accident. Both pilots are presumed dead. No further search operations will be conducted. General, with respect, we have radar contacts that suggest—" "I don't care what your radar shows. The decision comes from above my pay grade. You will comply with this directive and ensure your staff does the same. No exceptions." The line went dead, leaving Thorne staring at the receiver. Around him, the bunker continued its methodical hum, but everything felt different now. The fluorescent lights seemed harsher, the shadows deeper. In the span of a phone call, Captain Vera Kozlov had been erased from official existence. Lieutenant Davies looked up from his workstation, reading the expression on Thorne's face. "Sir, stand down the search operation. File the incident report as a training accident." "But sir, the radar contact—" "Never happened." Thorne's voice carried the weight of finality. Captain Kozlov and her wingman suffered equipment failure over the North Sea. Both aircraft are presumed lost with all hands. Davies stared at him, understanding dawning in his eyes. The young lieutenant had been in the military long enough to recognize when orders transcended logic. Some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when the enemy wore the same uniform. "Yes, sir, I'll process the paperwork." As Davies began the grim task of officially killing two pilots who might still be alive, Thorne walked to the bunker's single window. Outside, the October dawn was breaking over the airfield, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold. F-16s sat in neat rows on the tarmac, their canopies reflecting the morning light like closed eyes. Somewhere in that vast sky, answers waited. But the United States Air Force had decided that some questions were too dangerous to ask. Thorne touched the window glass, feeling the cold seep through his fingertips. In his 23 years of service, he'd learned that the hardest battles were often fought in silence, against enemies who couldn't be named or confronted. Today, he'd lost two pilots and his faith in the system he'd sworn to serve. The secure phone rang again, but this time, Thorne didn't answer. Captain Vera Kozlov's personnel file disappeared from the squadron database at 6:30 hours. The deletion was so thorough that even her call sign vanished from the duty roster, leaving behind only empty spaces where a decorated pilot had once existed. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez noticed the gap first. As the squadron's administrative specialist, she maintained the pilot records with meticulous care. The sudden absence of Kozlov's file triggered every instinct she developed during 8 years of military service. "Ma'am, we have a problem," Rodriguez said, approaching Major Elizabeth Kane in the squadron office. Kane looked up from her morning briefing notes, coffee mug halfway to her lips. "What kind of problem?" "Captain Kozlov's file is gone. Not archived, not transferred, gone, like she never existed." The coffee mug hit the desk with a sharp crack. Kane stared at her computer screen, watching the cursor blink in the empty space where Kozlov's record should have been. The implication sent ice through her veins. "Run a backup search. Check the archived files, the medical records, everything." Rodriguez's fingers flew across the keyboard, accessing databases that most personnel never saw. Each search came back empty, as if the Air Force's most skilled night fighter had been carefully erased from existence. "Nothing, ma'am. Even her academy records are gone." Kane stood slowly, her mind racing through possibilities. File corruptions happened, but not like this. Not with such surgical precision. Someone with serious access had decided that Captain Vera Kozlov was too dangerous to remember. What about hard copies, training records, flight evaluations? "I checked the physical files this morning. Her folder is missing." The silence stretched between them, heavy with implications. Kane had known Kozlov for 3 years, had watched her evolve from a competent pilot into something approaching legend. The woman who'd earned her wings in Afghanistan, who'd pioneered new night fighting techniques, who'd saved 4 lives during a rescue mission in Syria, erased like a mistake. "Sergeant, I need you to forget we had this conversation. Don't search for her records again, don't mention her name to anyone. Understood?" Rodriguez nodded, her face pale. "Yes, ma'am, but what about the other pilots? They're going to ask questions." "Let them ask, but you don't have answers. Captain Kozlov never existed in our system." As Rodriguez left the office, Kane stared at the empty screen. Somewhere in the bureaucratic maze of military intelligence, powerful people had decided that remembering Vera Kozlov was more dangerous than forgetting her. The woman who'd once saved Kane's life during a training accident had become a ghost. Kane opened her desk drawer and pulled out a photograph. The squadron's last Christmas party, Kozlov laughing at something Lieutenant Patterson had said. In 12 hours, she'd burn the picture and pretend she'd never known the woman who'd taught her to fly by instinct instead of instruments. But first, she'd make one phone call. The call came at 800 hours, just as Major Kane was preparing to destroy the last evidence of Captain Kozlov's existence. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, speaking with the careful precision of someone accustomed to classified conversations. "Major Kane, this is Colonel Sarah Mitchell, Air Force Special Operations. I understand you served with Captain Vera Kozlov." Kane's blood turned to ice. "I'm sorry, Colonel, but I'm not familiar with that name." "Major, I'm calling from a secure line with appropriate clearance. I need to know everything about Captain Kozlov's flight capabilities, particularly her experience with night operations." The photograph of the Christmas party lay on Kane's desk, Kozlov's face smiling up at her. In the picture, she wore the silver wings that had been earned through blood and determination, the same wings that had apparently never existed. "Colonel, I'd like to help, but our records show no officer by that name has served in this squadron." A pause, then, "Major, I'm going to be direct. Captain Kozlov is alive, and she's in a situation that requires immediate extraction. I need to know her capabilities because lives depend on it." Kane's hand trembled as she gripped the phone. "She's alive." "Barely. and she's in possession of information that could compromise national security if it falls into the wrong hands. I need to know if she can fly anything other than F-16s. The relief was overwhelming. Kane closed her eyes, seeing Kozlov's face during their last conversation, the way she'd laughed at some joke about the weather. The woman who'd been erased from existence was still fighting somewhere in the darkness. She can fly anything with wings, Colonel. Kozlov learned to pilot crop dusters before she was 16, mastered helicopters during her first deployment. Give her 15 minutes with any aircraft manual, and she'll be combat ready. What about survival skills? She grew up in rural Montana, spent summers with her grandfather who'd been a Korean War pod. She knows how to disappear, how to live off the land. But Colonel, where is she? That's classified, Major. But I can tell you that she's exactly where she needs to be, doing exactly what she was trained to do. The line went dead, leaving Kane staring at the photograph. In the picture, Kozlov wore the relaxed smile of someone who'd never doubted her place in the world. Now she was a ghost, fighting battles that couldn't be acknowledged. Kane picked up her lighter, then set it down again. The photograph would stay hidden, but it wouldn't be destroyed. Some stories were too important to forget, even when forgetting was the only way to survive. Outside, F-16s began their morning patrol, their engines painting contrails across the October sky. One of those pilots should have been Vera Kozlov, but officially, she'd never existed. Lieutenant Marcus "Roadrunner" Patterson was the first to notice the changes. Subtle at first, duty rosters adjusted, call signs reassigned, aircraft maintenance schedules altered without explanation. But when he found himself assigned to Kozlov's usual aircraft, the pieces began forming a picture he didn't want to see. "Hey, Sarge," he called to Rodriguez as she passed the ready room. "Where's Nightingale today?" Rodriguez stopped, her face carefully neutral. "I'm sorry, Lieutenant, but I don't know who you're referring to." Patterson stared at her, confusion mixing with growing alarm. "Captain Kozlov, Vera. She's supposed to be flying the 900 patrol." "Sir, there's no one by that name assigned to this squadron." The words hit like a physical blow. Patterson had flown with Kozlov for 2 years, had learned advanced night fighting techniques from her, had trusted her with his life during a dozen missions. Now Rodriguez was looking at him like he was describing a hallucination. "Sarge, we had dinner with her last week. The whole squadron was there." "I'm sorry, sir, but I think you might be confused. The duty roster has you flying solo patrol today." As Rodriguez walked away, Patterson felt reality shifting around him. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts, looking for Kozlov's number. The entry was gone as if it had never existed. Text messages they'd exchanged, photos from squadron events, all erased. "This is impossible," he whispered to himself. Captain James Hawk Morrison appeared in the doorway, his flight suit bearing the same confused expression that Patterson felt. "You feel it too, don't you? Like something's missing?" Patterson nodded, relief flooding through him. "Nightingale." "Who?" The relief died instantly. Morrison was looking at him with the same blank expression that Rodriguez had worn, as if Patterson was speaking a foreign language. "Captain Kozlov, our squadron leader, the woman who saved your ass during the training exercise last month." Morrison's face remained carefully neutral. "Patterson, I think you might be under some stress. Maybe you should talk to the flight surgeon." As Morrison walked away, Patterson stood alone in the ready room, surrounded by the ghosts of conversations that had never happened. The squadron photos on the wall showed empty spaces where Kozlov should have been, digital artifacts of a carefully orchestrated deletion. He walked to the window and stared out at the flight line, watching technicians prepare F-16s for the morning patrol. One of those aircraft should have been Kozlov's, but according to everyone around him, she'd never existed. The only question was whether he was losing his mind, or whether something far more sinister was happening. Either way, He was completely alone with the memory of a woman who'd never been. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Lieutenant Patterson was cleaning out his flight gear when he found it, a small digital recorder that had fallen behind his locker. The device was standard issue, used for post-flight debriefings and personal voice memos. But when he played it back, he heard something that made his blood run cold. Personal log, October 15th, Lieutenant Patterson recording. Just finished night training with Captain Kozlov. Nightingale pushed us harder than usual tonight, like she knew something we didn't. Her exact words were, "If you ever find yourself alone in the dark, remember that the sky doesn't lie. Navigate by the stars, not by what people tell you to believe." Patterson's own voice continued. She seemed distracted during the debrief, kept checking her watch. When I asked about it, she said something about patterns and how the truth always surfaces eventually. I think she suspects something about the canceled operation. The recording ended, but Patterson's hands were shaking. Here was proof, digital evidence that Captain Vera Kozlov had existed, that she'd been part of their squadron, that she'd been investigating something dangerous enough to get her erased from existence. He made 3 copies of the recording, hiding them in separate locations. Then he began his own investigation, carefully and quietly. The squadron's computer systems might have been scrubbed clean, but digital footprints were harder to eliminate completely. Working through the night, Patterson accessed backup servers, maintenance logs, and archived communications. Each search revealed fragments of Kozlov's existence: a fuel consumption report bearing her aircraft number, a maintenance request signed with her authorization code, a brief radio transmission archived in the communications database. The pattern became clear around midnight. Someone had conducted a methodical deletion of Captain Kozlov's records, but they'd missed the peripheral systems. The woman who'd been erased from personnel files still existed in the technical databases, scattered across a dozen different computer systems like fragments of a broken mirror. Patterson compiled the evidence into a single file, his mind racing through possibilities. Kozlov had been investigating something connected to the canceled operation, something important enough to justify making her disappear. The question was whether she'd been silenced permanently or if she was still out there, fighting battles that couldn't be acknowledged. At 300 hours, he made his decision. The evidence would be copied to a secure drive and hidden off base. If anything happened to him, at least someone would know that Captain Vera Nightingale Kozlov had existed, that she'd been a skilled pilot and a dedicated officer who'd asked the wrong questions. As dawn broke over the airfield, Patterson watched F-16s prepare for their morning patrols. Somewhere in the vast sky, Kozlov was either dead or fighting for her life. Either way, she wouldn't be forgotten. The secure message arrived on Colonel Thorne's classified terminal at 600 hours, its origin masked by layers of encryption that suggested Pentagon involvement. The subject line was simple: Operation Nightfall, immediate activation. Thorne stared at the screen, his coffee growing cold as he read the directive. After 3 weeks of official silence, Operation Nightfall was suddenly back online. The mission parameters were identical to the original briefing, but the personnel assignments had changed. Captain Kozlov's name was nowhere to be found. "Sir," Lieutenant Davies approached the workstation, carrying a stack of radar printouts. The overnight monitoring showed some unusual activity. "What kind of activity?" 3 separate contacts, all moving at high speed through the search zone. Same signature as the contact we logged after Flight 447 disappeared. Thorne studied the printouts, his mind racing through implications. The contacts appeared at regular intervals, 0200, 400, and 600 hours, each following the same flight path through coordinates that had become a graveyard for questions. "Any communication attempts?" "None, sir. The contacts don't respond to radar identification or radio calls. They appear for approximately 12 seconds, then vanish. The pattern was too precise to be coincidental. Someone or something was using the search zone for regular operations, moving through airspace that should have been empty. The timing coincided with the activation of Operation Nightfall, suggesting a connection that military intelligence didn't want acknowledged. Davies, I need you to monitor those coordinates personally. Full spectrum analysis, every frequency, every sensor we have. If something's out there, I want to know about it. Yes, sir. But, sir, what about the stand-down order from General Harrison? Thorne looked at the young officer, seeing his own doubts reflected in Davies' expression. The official directive was clear: no further investigation of Flight 447. But the radar contacts suggested that the story was far from over. The stand-down order applies to the search for Flight 447. This is routine airspace monitoring. Davies nodded, understanding the distinction. In the military, survival often depended on the ability to follow orders while pursuing truth through carefully constructed loopholes. As Davies returned to his workstation, Thorne reread the Operation Nightfall directive. The mission would launch at 2100 hours, with a flight path that took the aircraft directly through the coordinates where Kozlov had vanished. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. Somewhere in the Pentagon, powerful people were playing chess with human lives. Kozlov had been a piece that asked too many questions, so she'd been removed from the board. But the game was far from over, and the players were about to discover that some pieces couldn't be sacrificed without consequences. The secure phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. General Harrison's voice was tight with urgency. "Colonel, you have new orders. Captain Kozlov has been declared killed in action. I need you to sign the death certificate immediately." Major Kane stood outside the squadron commander's office, her hand raised to knock, when she heard Colonel Brennan's voice through the door. The conversation was clearly meant to be private, but the thin walls of the temporary building betrayed more than they concealed. "I don't care what the paperwork says, General. Kozlov was the best pilot I've ever commanded. You don't just lose someone like that to equipment failure." Kane pressed closer to the door, her pulse quickening. Someone with authority was asking the same questions that had been haunting her for days. "Sir, with respect, Captain Kozlov discovered something about Operation Nightfall that certain people didn't want exposed. Now she's officially dead, and we're supposed to pretend she never existed." A pause. Then, "Colonel, I'm going to pretend I didn't hear that. But I need you to understand that this conversation never happened. There are forces at work here that go far beyond anything we can control." Kane backed away from the door, her mind reeling. Colonel Brennan knew the truth. Kozlov had been investigating something dangerous, something connected to the canceled operation. The official story about equipment failure was a lie designed to protect people who'd made her disappear. She walked quickly to her office, locking the door behind her. The photograph of the Christmas party lay hidden in her desk drawer, the only evidence that Captain Kozlov had ever existed. But now she knew she wasn't alone in remembering the woman who'd been erased from history. Kane opened her secure computer and began typing a message to Colonel Mitchell, the mysterious officer who'd called asking about Kozlov's capabilities. If Kozlov was alive and fighting somewhere in the darkness, she deserved to know that people still believed in her. The message was simple: Nightingale Squadron remembers. Whatever she's facing, she's not alone. As she hit send, Kane felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. The official story might be that Captain Kozlov had never existed, but the truth was more resilient than military bureaucracy. Stories like hers had a way of surviving, even when powerful people tried to bury them. Outside, F-16s began their evening patrol, their engines singing against the October sky. One of those pilots should have been Vera Kozlov, but she was fighting a different kind of battle now. The question was whether she'd live to tell the story. The phone rang at 2000 hours, just as Kane was preparing to leave for the day. The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, speaking with the careful precision of someone accustomed to classified conversations. "Major Kane, this is Colonel Mitchell. I received your message. We need to talk." 300 miles away, in a secure facility buried beneath the Virginia countryside, Captain Vera Kozlov opened her eyes to fluorescent lights and the steady hum of electronic equipment. Her body ached from injuries she couldn't remember receiving, and her mouth tasted of metal and medical antiseptic. "Welcome back, Captain." The voice belonged to a woman in her 50s, wearing the uniform of a full colonel. Her name tape read Mitchell, and her eyes held the kind of intelligence that came from decades of managing secrets. "Where am I?" Kozlov's voice was hoarse, barely above a whisper. "Somewhere safe. You've been unconscious for 3 days." Kozlov tried to sit up, but restraints held her to the medical table. The movement sent pain shooting through her ribs, and she noticed bandages covering her arms and hands. "The mission, what happened to Patterson?" "Lieutenant Patterson is safe. He's been asking questions about your disappearance, which is both admirable and dangerous." Mitchell moved closer, her expression softening slightly. "Captain, I need you to understand something. Officially, you're dead. Your entire existence has been erased from military records. To the outside world, you never flew for the Air Force." The words hit like physical blows. Kozlov stared at the ceiling, processing the implications. Her squadron, her career, her identity, all wiped away as if they'd never existed. "Why?" "Because you discovered something about Operation Nightfall that certain people didn't want exposed. Something that could compromise national security if it became public knowledge." Mitchell sat down beside the medical table, her voice taking on the tone of someone sharing dangerous secrets. "The aircraft you encountered 3 weeks ago, they weren't foreign. They were ours. Experimental technology that officially doesn't exist." Kozlov's mind raced through possibilities. The sleek, impossibly fast aircraft that had appeared out of nowhere, moving with supernatural speed through hostile airspace. Technology that belonged in science fiction, not military reality. The program is classified beyond normal levels. Only a handful of people know it exists, and they've decided that you know too much to be allowed back into normal service. "So I'm dead." "To the Air Force, yes. But to me, you're exactly what we need for the next phase of the operation." Mitchell leaned forward, her eyes intense. "Captain, I'm offering you a choice. You can disappear completely, live out your life under a new identity with full pension and benefits, or you can join my team and help us expose the truth about what's really happening." Kozlov closed her eyes, feeling the weight of decision settling on her shoulders. Everything she'd worked for, everything she'd believed in, had been stripped away. But the pilot who'd earned her wings in Afghanistan, who'd saved lives in Syria, who'd pioneered new night fighting techniques, that woman still existed. "What kind of team?" Mitchell smiled, and for the first time, Kozlov saw hope in her expression. "The kind that asks dangerous questions and refuses to accept convenient answers." The debriefing took place in a windowless room that smelled of coffee and electronic equipment. Colonel Mitchell sat across from Kozlov, a digital recorder between them, and a stack of classified files that represented the truth behind Operation Nightfall. "Start from the beginning, Captain. Tell me everything you remember about the encounter." Kozlov closed her eyes, reaching back through 3 weeks of unconsciousness and medical treatment to the moment that had changed everything. The memories came in fragments: radio chatter, the sudden appearance of impossible aircraft, the realization that she was witnessing something that shouldn't exist. "We were conducting routine intercept training over the North Sea. Patterson and I had been airborne for 45 minutes when the first contact appeared on radar." "Describe the contact." "It was unlike anything I'd ever seen. No heat signature, no electromagnetic emissions, moving at speeds that should have been impossible for conventional aircraft. When I tried to establish visual contact, the object seemed to phase in and out of existence. Mitchell made notes on a tablet, her expression carefully neutral. What happened next? I ordered Patterson to maintain distance while I moved to intercept. As I approached, the object suddenly accelerated, moving faster than anything in our inventory. Then two more contacts appeared, flanking my position. Kozlov paused, remembering the moment when everything changed. That's when I realized they were ours. The flight patterns, the formation discipline, it was too precise to be foreign technology. How did you know? The lead aircraft executed a maneuver I'd seen before, during an exercise at Nelly's. It was a signature move that only American pilots would know. That's when I understood we were dealing with a classified program. Mitchell leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. What did you do? I transmitted a query using classified authentication codes. The response came back immediately, valid authentication, but from a program that wasn't supposed to exist. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Kozlov had stumbled onto a secret, so classified that acknowledging it required making her disappear from official existence. Captain, the program you encountered is called Project Shadowbird. It's been operational for 2 years, testing aircraft that represent a generational leap in aviation technology. Mitchell opened one of the classified files, revealing photographs of sleek, angular aircraft that seemed to bend light around their surfaces. These are the aircraft you encountered. They're capable of speeds exceeding Mach 4, with stealth capabilities that make them effectively invisible to conventional radar. Kozlov studied the photographs, recognizing the distinctive silhouettes from her encounter. Why the secrecy? Because the technology is 50 years ahead of anything our enemies possess. If they knew what we were capable of, it would fundamentally alter the balance of power. And I threatened that balance. You asked the right questions at the wrong time. The program directors decided that you knew too much to be allowed back into normal service. Mitchell closed the file, her expression serious. But they made one mistake. They assumed that making you disappear would end the investigation. Instead, it's just beginning. The mission briefing took place in a conference room that didn't officially exist, attended by people whose names would never appear in any government directory. Colonel Mitchell sat at the head of the table, flanked by specialists whose expertise covered everything from advanced avionics to digital forensics. Ladies and gentlemen, meet Captain Vera Kozlov, call sign Nightingale. She's going to help us expose the truth about Project Shadowbird. Kozlov looked around the table, seeing faces that carried the weight of dangerous knowledge. These were people who'd chosen to ask difficult questions despite the personal cost, united by a shared belief that some secrets were too dangerous to keep. The situation is this, Mitchell continued. Project Shadowbird has been operating outside normal oversight for 2 years. The aircraft you encountered represent technology that could revolutionize military aviation, but the program has been corrupted by people who view it as a personal empire. Dr. Sarah Chen, the team's technical specialist, opened a laptop and displayed a schematic of the Shadowbird aircraft. The technology is based on principles that shouldn't exist in conventional physics. Propulsion systems that manipulate electromagnetic fields, stealth capabilities that bend light itself. It's decades ahead of anything in the public domain. How is that possible? Kozlov asked. Because the program has been drawing resources from dozens of black-budget projects without oversight. They've created a shadow military with technology that our own government doesn't fully understand. Mitchell pulled up satellite imagery showing a facility hidden in the Nevada desert. This is where the Shadowbird aircraft are based. Officially, it's a weather research station. In reality, It's the most advanced aviation facility in the world. What's the mission? We're going to infiltrate the facility and document everything. Flight logs, technical specifications, personnel records, evidence that proves the program exists and operates outside legal authority. Kozlov studied the satellite imagery, her tactical mind automatically analyzing approach routes and security measures. This is a suicide mission. The facility is protected by systems that we don't even understand. Not if we use their own technology against them. Mitchell smiled, pulling up another schematic. We've managed to acquire detailed plans for a Shadowbird aircraft. You're going to fly it. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Kozlov would be piloting technology that officially didn't exist, penetrating a facility that was protected by systems decades ahead of conventional military hardware. Colonel, I'm honored by your confidence, but I've never flown anything like this. Captain, you're the best pilot I've ever known. You learned to fly crop dusters before you were 16, mastered helicopters during your first deployment, and pioneered night fighting techniques that are still classified. If anyone can handle alien technology, it's you. Dr. Chen leaned forward, her expression serious. The aircraft responds to neural interfaces as much as physical controls. It's designed to be flown by instinct rather than training. Kozlov nodded slowly, understanding the challenge. Everything she'd learned about flying would have to be adapted to technology that operated by principles she didn't understand. When do we start? The training facility was hidden beneath a decommissioned missile silo in Montana, its existence known only to a handful of people who'd sworn their lives to expose the truth. Kozlov descended through layers of security to reach the hangar where her new aircraft waited. The Shadowbird prototype was unlike anything she'd ever seen. Its hull seemed to absorb light, creating the illusion that she was looking at a hole in reality rather than a physical object. The aircraft was elegant and predatory, designed by minds that understood aerodynamics in ways that conventional engineering couldn't explain. Beautiful, isn't she? Dr. Chen approached from behind, carrying a tablet loaded with technical specifications. We call her the Nightingale in honor of your call sign. Kozlov walked around the aircraft, studying its organic curves and seamless construction. There were no visible joints or seams, as if the entire craft had been grown rather than built. The cockpit was a smooth dome that offered perfect visibility in all directions. How does it fly? That's what we're about to find out. The neural interface system requires a direct connection between the pilot and the aircrafts.